Welcome to Complete BS, the official podcast of couch coaches everywhere. Not just football. It's every sport that ruins your parlay, wrecks your fantasy week, and still brings you back for more. Buzzer beaters, blown leads, and brackets and flames. Yeah, we're all over it. Unfiltered takes, armchair analysis, and enough bold opinions to fill a playbook. Hosted by Brian Schmuck, sports junkie, the Saban of stats, and your official voice of I could coach better than that. Let's go.
Couch Coach Nation, what a wild weekend. Week 1 is in the books. There were big upsets, a losing streak snapped, and a whole lot of games that we and everybody else missed on. But not everybody. Coach Lee Corso in his final game day headgear pick got it right. He was a perfect 6-0 on his 6 picks. I got to say, ESPN did right by him. The outpouring of love and admiration for him, it was heartfelt. And as someone who's been watching Game Day since its inception in 1987, I felt like it was a fitting send-off for the Sunshine Scooter. AV, what do you think about Corso and everything ESPN did around him?
Yeah, I thought it was one of the few things they got right. I complain about ESPN quite a bit, but they got this right, man. They gave a lot of love to Coach, not just that day, but leading up. They put out a documentary and some interviews, and it was really cool. I think that being in Columbus for the biggest game of the weekend and that he first put on the Ohio State head was the first mascot head he ever picked. I think that was fitting.
I think it'll be really interesting whether they start something new next week, it comes in a little bit later in the season, or if it's next season. But they've been closing the show this way for over 30 years. How do they close their show now? That's something that's going to be really interesting that I'm going to be tuning in definitely next week to see what they do, and the rest of this year to see how do things change. But before we get to the games that we talked about on Friday, there was a huge losing streak that was snapped. The Kent State Golden Flashes, got to give them a shout out. They broke a 21-game losing streak, their first win since September 16th, 2023. Didn't win at all last year, so good for them to start on the right side of the column with a win. So that's good for them. Little Maction going on there. They beat Merrimack, I believe it was. That was good on Kent State. But now we got to eat some crow, because I know I tanked it this past week. I was wrong on virtually everything that I picked. But we weren't the only ones. There are a lot of people that got things wrong. Now we've got a little game footage, a little tape to compare against, and we're not just living off of names, reputation, off-season hype. We've actually got some games that we can go back and compare guys against. So our game of the week, the Ohio State-Texas game, everybody was geared up for that, looking at it. And this game, it didn't feel close at all during the game. The Ohio State defensive line dominated from start to finish. If you're given a game ball, I think it's got to go to that entire defensive line, because they dominated Texas's offensive line. If I'm the Texas coaching staff and fans, I'm way more concerned about the Texas offensive line than I am Arch Manning's play. He looked rattled. He was off, absolutely. He'll get better. He's good. But that offensive line, that was shaky.
It's a really good point, and I'm glad you made it. For some reason, everyone thinks that he's been given the Heisman Trophy already, and there's just been a lot of hype around him. And so he comes into that game with all eyes on him. His first major start against the top defense on the road. Didn't do great for sure, and a lot of people probably say he played poorly. But there was nothing going on around him. Like, they couldn't get the run game going. They couldn't get the short passing game going. Receivers weren't overly helping him. So I think there's a bigger concern, like you said, for Texas than just Arch Manning.
And most coaches will say the biggest jump happens between game 1 and game 2. Texas has got a couple of cupcakes before they go to Florida at the end of September. So they've got some time to fix things. Trevor Goodsby there on the left side, he didn't have a great game. Brandon Baker was jumping off sides, false starting a couple of times. So, that line, it did not perform. I think if you're Steve Sarkisian and you were said before the game, hey, you're only going to give up 14 points. Are you good with that? He would have taken that all day long and assumed that they're going to win. The Texas defense was not bad. Jeremiah Smith didn't go wild. The Ohio State running game wasn't all over the place. Ohio State didn't dominate on offense. the Texas defense was good. If they can fix that offensive line and give Arch some time, get that running game going a little bit, Texas is going to be fine. We mentioned this last week. The loser of this game, they're not out of anything. Nothing has changed for them about what their goals are, any of those top 10 teams that lost. So lots to work on in Austin over the next couple of weeks. You got a couple of cupcakes before a big matchup in Gainesville at the end of the month.
Just to jump in real quick, that will be the litmus test for Texas. They'll go off against these cupcakes. They'll fix some things. I think they're a better team than Florida. They should walk into the Swamp and win that game and fairly comfortably. I don't think it's going to be a nail biter. I don't know what the final score will be, but if they don't do that, if they struggle or lose to Florida, then you can start panicking.
Yeah, and then the week after that, they've got the Red River rivalry with Oklahoma. So get right, and then you've got two really big games coming up last week of September, first week of October.
Yep.
Probably the big shocker in the top 10, Florida State 31, Alabama 17. I was stunned. This is the most stunned I have been about a Florida State result since Florida State was shut out at home against Wake Forest in 2006. I didn't think Florida State would score 17 points the whole game. They did that in the first half. They didn't score 24 points last year against an FBS team the entire season. Bama takes the ball down in the opening drive. I thought the Florida State defensive line looked confused out of it and thought, okay, here we go again. This is Florida State all over again. But then they locked in, and that defense changed after that first possession. Florida State answered. They went down and scored. Then Florida State scored on their next two possessions to go up 17-7. And I thought, oh, this is a different Florida State team. You know, we talked last week, 49 new players on their roster. This isn't the same team as last year. I don't think Mike Norvell and the Florida State coaching staff could have asked for a better first half of football than what they got. It's the best first half of football that they've had since going back to when Jordan Travis was on the team. So a lot to like there. For me, their first big mistake came with that muffed punt late in the third quarter. In the second half, I felt like Bama was starting to kind of figure things out a little bit against Florida State. But what was so pivotal was Alabama cut the lead to 7 points, 24-17, and Florida State answered right back with a 10-play drive to push the lead again to 31-17. And on that drive, they had a 4th and 1 on their own 34, and they hand the ball off to Roydell Williams. He picks up 4. The Florida State offensive line would not have done that last year. He would have been tackled for a loss in the backfield. That shows me that this is a different offensive line. This is a different mentality. The defensive line played a lot better after that first drive. There's a lot of excitement in Tallahassee. They've got 2 cupcakes coming up before a trip to Virginia on a Friday night and then Miami. Big showdown in early October. There's a lot of excitement in Tallahassee.
This is one of the reasons why in the portal era, week 1 becomes incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to predict because like you said, there's 49 new players on the team. We haven't seen any of them. So based off of what we saw last year, there's no way this should have been a game, right? Last year's team, after that, they marched down the field and scored on the first drive, would have quit. Like it would have been over after the first drive. I think Norvell's 2 best additions were honestly the coordinators, right? So like Tony White seems to have brought a Mickey Andrews style mentality and toughness of if you're not going to do your job, you're not going to play attitude. He said that in many interviews, and it played out. The same with Gus. He's a run-first guy, and he brought some toughness to the offensive line. There just seems to be a different mentality. It probably starts with the coordinators bringing their tough mentality and their toughness to the game, and is bled down to the players, and that was evident, man. They were not backing down. Earl Little set the tone on one of the first plays where he comes down and just throws his body into the running back, and he did that all day long. And the rest of the defense, after that first drive, seemed to figure it out. They played with intensity, played with toughness, weren't scared. It was impressive. It was a really fun game to watch, too.
Absolutely. Our nightcap on Saturday night was the Tigers versus the Tigers, and LSU came out on top 17-10. I've been critical of LSU's defense for years, not just this offseason, but for years. And they came to play. They showed up and really surprised me. Clemson returned 4 offensive linemen, and that should have been a strength of the team, but LSU was able to get pressure on Klubnik and force him to leave the pocket. He didn't look like an experienced quarterback. You would have thought this was his first start, like we were talking about with Arch earlier. He looked confused. He was uncomfortable all day. That's kudos to the LSU coaching staff and their defense and how they got after it. There's nobody been higher on Clemson than me all off season. And my biggest concern for them was who's going to run the ball. They got to have somebody to replace Phil Maffa, somebody to take pressure off Klubnik so that they're just not sitting back there and able to tee off knowing it's the run and we're going to cover everybody and drop 5 or 6. They still don't have an answer to that. Their top runner was Adam Randall, 5 carries for 16 yards. You can't do that in a top 10 matchup against LSU with the talent that they have. They do have a true freshman, Gideon Davidson. He didn't get a single carry. Looking back at the game, he was in there and he missed a block. Listen, I get it. Blocking is absolutely part of the running back's job, but he's got to run the ball. And Clemson, you're going to need to take some thumps and lumps with Gideon Davidson missing a couple of assignments because he's your best natural runner. You got to get him in there. You got to get the ball to him and take pressure off of Klubnik. That's your solution. If you can't run the ball, you're going to have a long year and it's not going to be your only loss. They also lost Antonio Williams in the first half. He didn't return. I'm not sure the status of that injury. Hopefully he's not out for very long and he can come back quick. But they've got Troy next week and then Georgia Tech the week after that. Georgia Tech's a really good football team. They won against a Colorado team, and Georgia Tech maybe had a C-, D+ kind of game. They need to get right against Troy, figure out who's going to run the ball, because they're in for a war against Georgia Tech.
So for the Clemson game, I have questions for Garrett Riley. Maybe I have questions about Garrett Riley.
Everybody should.
Right, but that doesn't seem like there is. It seems like it's all Klubnik's fault or, even Dabo's fault. But you score 10 points. You have all the talent in the world. And I hear your concern on running back, and that's valid. They don't seem to have a star back there, but they have plenty of athletes to carry the ball, I would think. But you have 3 potential all-conference, all-American level talent wide receivers that you can't get the ball to. You're running slants like it's the only route available. You're not pushing the ball down the field. I don't know. I didn't get the game plan. I'm not a coach. I'm couch coach, right? So, fair enough. But he was hired, and he was supposed to be a big-time hire to rejuvenate their offense, and it just hasn't happened. And Cade Klubnik hasn't developed into what he has potential to be. The wide receivers that they have that should be reminding people of T. Higgins and Mike Williams and all those greats aren't doing that. But you're right. Georgia Tech's a good team. They really killed Colorado in the box score, but they had all those turnovers in the first half and left a lot of scoring opportunities out there and kept the game close. But we'll see, man. I don't know if I'm just assuming the offense will get better for Clemson or if it actually will.
Clemson and Texas, they're asking each other the same questions this week.
For sure.
What happened up front? Why couldn't we run the ball? Why can't we get it out to our athletes? It's the same questions for both. Both Clemson and Texas, their defenses played well enough to win. Their offensive line let them down. The ground game let them down. Their quarterbacks looked rattled and didn't have time to do anything in the pocket. They got the same thing going on in both places. So we look at then Sunday night, Miami, Notre Dame, Catholics versus convicts, we're at 6 or so right now. This game, it really seemed off to me. Notre Dame didn't seem to show up until the fourth quarter. They were manhandled on the line of scrimmage. Every one of these games, all 4, it all started with the line of scrimmage. Notre Dame's got the best running back in the country. He finished with 10 carries for 33 yards, 4 catches. But he got 6 of those 10 carries and 3 of the catches in the fourth quarter. What were you doing, Notre Dame, the first 3 quarters? You've got the best running back in the country, and he can only get 4 carries through 3 quarters? I didn't understand this game plan at all. Miami destroyed them. Offensive line for Miami was strong, gave back time. The Miami defensive line got after them. It never seemed close, even though it came down to a 3-point game. I never felt like Notre Dame was in it till just the very end. Beck, he wasn't anything special. He was just okay. He got things done. Miami, they played about how I expected. It's just Notre Dame didn't play at all what I expected. Fletcher and Brown were a nice combo for Miami running the ball. They combined for 120 yards. But man, Notre Dame, I don't understand the game plan. A lot of coaches will sometimes say it's just kind of how things are progressing throughout the game. So I would think, well, maybe there's another running back that's got a hot hand. But no, that wasn't the case either.
When we were talking about this game in the last pod, I said, look, I think they're very evenly matched. They both got really good rosters. But at the end of the day, if I'm looking at the sidelines and I see Marcus Freeman and Mario Cristobal, I'm going with Freeman. Not that Cristobal did anything great in this game in terms of X's and O's, but he didn't screw it up. And I felt like Notre Dame's game plan was not optimal because the first 4 plays of the game, their new starter, according to C.J. Carr, he's not a freshman, but he hasn't ever started before. So he's out there for the first time in a big environment. And they start throwing the ball. First 4 plays, okay, that makes sense. They're short passes. They're loading up to stop the run, and maybe you get uncomfortable. That went on for 3 quarters, and it was baffling. I think that, we talked about Texas and Clemson having the same questions. I think Florida State and Miami have similar scenarios where you're not asking questions because you feel really good. Like Florida State beat Alabama, Miami beat Notre Dame, but what is Alabama and Notre Dame going to be the rest of the year, right? Because they didn't look good at all. And so you're going to take it right now and you're going to celebrate it, and you're not going to question it very much, and you're going to say we beat a top 10 team. Both teams can say that, and that's true. But it'll be interesting to see. I don't think this is Nick Saban's Alabama, and I don't think this is last year's national championship game Notre Dame either. Now, I do kind of get the feeling that C.J. Carr will get his feet underneath him and that they will start running the ball more often with their running back, and they'll probably get better as the season goes on. I also think Alabama will get better as the season goes on, but it'll be interesting to see what these wins look like in a couple of months.
Yeah, if you're a fan of the 4 teams that lost and you're looking at your quarterback, if I'm a Notre Dame fan, I'm okay with CJ Carr. He didn't cost them the game at all.
Right.
The game plan, the coaches, and their use of Love, the best player on the field for either side, how they used him or how they didn't use him, that to me is what cost Notre Dame that game. Our AV's book club was a disappointing 0-4.
Hey, it was the first week of the season, Brian. Give me a chance this is a small sample size.
Absolutely. Maybe we'll do picks next week and say everybody needs to fade us.
Yeah,
but
you can
0-4
that's no problem.
0-4 to start the year. The bonus pick, Tulane, that was a winner. On Friday's episode, I just jumped off with 2 picks right off the bat. I was 1-1 on those. We were 2-5 combined to start. They weren't the only games that were shocking. You got Thursday night's Boise State loss to USF. Tarleton State beat Army. It was only their second ever win by an FBS team. There was a lot going on, shaking things up.
Well, I'll say from the 0-4 start for the book club, only one game I really disappointed I picked, and that's the Utah and UCLA game. That was just a bad pick. Alabama, Florida State, I took Alabama. Clemson, LSU, I took Clemson. Some of that is just not knowing what teams have. You're going off of last year's rosters, and you're just wrong, and that's going to happen. I can't watch these teams practice and whatnot. So I'll eat those, but I don't feel as bad about them. And then the Indiana game, they're playing Old Dominion, 41 minutes in a 60-minute game, 41 and a half minutes. Old Dominion had the ball 18 minutes. I don't know how they only won by 13 points. There wasn't a turnover margin. They only had 3 penalties for 25 yards. My guess is they just ran the ball for 6 yards every carry, and every drive took, half a quarter or something. But I would make that pick again based on the stats. I feel like that was a bad luck one.
You mentioned the Utah game, man. Devin Dampier, that kid's a player. He's
Yeah.
fun to watch. He put up big numbers. He definitely was the star of that game. My 2 players of the week, Justice Haynes from Michigan, 16 carries, 159 yards, 3 touchdowns. Opening drive, he took it 56 yards for a touchdown. John Mateer from Oklahoma, really efficient, 30 of 37, 392 yards, 3 touchdowns, an interception, added 24 yards on the ground and a rushing touchdown. And what do you know? That's our game of the week next week. We've got Michigan at Oklahoma. on Friday's episode. Michigan great John Colasar will be breaking down that game with us. We're also going to be looking at Illinois at Duke and the Cy-Hawk Trophy, Iowa at Iowa State. Those are our 3 games next week that we'll be talking about and making picks. When you look at our top 25, it's available on X. You can see the top 25. It'll be out before all the other polls come out. But if we just go, I'm going rapid through them. 25, BYU. 24, Alabama. 23, Nebraska. 22, Tennessee. 21, Michigan. Louisville at 20. Texas Tech, 19. Ole Miss at 18. Coming into the top 25 at number 17, Florida State. Oklahoma at 16. SMU, 15. Number 14 is Iowa State. 13, Notre Dame. Illinois at 12. Florida is number 11. Number 10, South Carolina, who had a nice win against Virginia Tech. Number 9, Arizona State. 8, Texas. I had them preseason number 3. They fall to number 8. My preseason number 1, Clemson, is in at number 7. Miami, 6. LSU at 5. Georgia's 4. Oregon is 3. Penn State at 2. And to me, I think it's obvious the number 1 team has to be Ohio State.
Ohio State's the national champs. They beat the current number 1 team. Then it gets difficult because depending on what you're valuing, if you're just valuing resume and everybody has 1 game, LSU could be number 2. I think it's good where it sits, and as you get more data each week, you'll fine-tune it. I'll be interested to see what the media does with some of these games.
I think the Florida State disparity in how the media is going to vote is going to be wild. Yeah. I think you're going to have some media members that are going to put Florida State somewhere between 5 and 10, and you're going to have others that are going to have them between 20 and 25. I think they're probably going to settle somewhere in that mid-range. Are they ahead of Alabama? That's my big question is, do you have those media members that say, no, we're keeping Alabama here and we put Florida State here, and Florida State's still behind Alabama? With some of the other ones, yeah, there's a case to absolutely could be made for LSU at number 2. Penn State didn't beat anybody, but they won convincingly. They did their job. They just didn't happen to have a top 10 matchup. I still like Penn State. For me, I think there's some with what do you think this team is and some of what they actually did. And you kind of got to meld that together. And so, yeah, I wasn't high on LSU. I had LSU preseason 16. I jumped them up to number 5. That's for me when I'm looking at the poll and when I'm doing this. There's a little bit of both to try and come up with it. And as you said, as the season goes along, it will be more of what is your resume? Because right now your resume is 1 game and a whole lot of questions and what ifs. We're still looking at off-season expectations. So we'll get more to it. But that's everything for today. Make sure you join us on Friday. Again, we'll have John Colasar, Michigan great, talking Michigan, Ohio State. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast and follow us on X and Instagram. We'll see you later, Couch Coach Nation.
Thanks for listening to Complete BS. Be sure to subscribe, share, and follow us online. And tell us what you think of this episode. Use hashtag CouchCoachNation, and let's keep the conversation going.